All right, so hi everyone. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Trudy. I work for Shorashim in North America. We want to thank you all for coming to this special event to honor Yom HaShoah, which is Israel's Holocaust Remembrance Day. Shorashim is an educational organization that was started nearly 40 years ago and is dedicated to building bridges between North Americans and Israelis. We're known for our birthright Israel and our tailor-made trips to Israel. We're continuing to find ways to reach our goals by bringing people together virtually during this time of social distancing. Today's program, An Intimate Conversation with Irene Miller, is part of a series that has provided a space for Holocaust survivors and other individuals to share their stories with our community through our Better Together campaign. We started this campaign to remain committed to our mission and to all of our alumni, friends, and family. Please stay tuned for upcoming programmings from us. I'd now like to introduce Nir from our Israel office to talk a little bit more about today's program.
Hi everyone, my name is Nir and I work for Shorashim Israel office. And it is a very special occasion because we meet here Americans and Israelis today, especially today when it's Erev Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Eve in Israel, when every year we're used to going to ceremonies and being with families and the community, and now everything has changed. But I'm really grateful that we still have the opportunity to gather here virtually. And here, Irene, our honored and special guest, and Irene is gonna talk about herself and share her amazing story, and she's gonna introduce herself. So. You go on, Irene. In a second, I just want to say that towards the end, we're going to be open for questions. So if you have a question, just send them to Trudy and we'll.
Is it my turn now?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Good afternoon and good evening to you in the United States and in Israel. As you heard, my name is Irene Miller. I am one of the 10% of Jewish children who survived the Holocaust. Among the 6 million of Jews who were killed were 1.5 million of children, 90% of Jewish children. Though I can tell you only about my survival journey, those of us fortunate to be left alive become also the voices of the children who did not live to tell their story. This is what I looked like when Nazis attacked Poland. Please, the photo. Waiting for the picture. Trudy?
I'm going to be sharing my screen, so you will be able to see on Trudy's screen.
Yes. Trudy, just delete the side ones. Yes. So here I am when Nazis attacked Poland. I was either 5 or 6 years old. My immediate family was made up of 4. My older sister, show the next. My older sister and I, she is here 8 and I am 3. And our parents, next. Close it. But we had a large extended family in Poland, numbering close to 100 members. When the Nazis attacked Poland, my parents apparently were aware what was going on. But first, bombs were falling day and night and day and night. We lived on the top floor of an apartment building, where it was the most vulnerable place because bombs were falling through the roof and the ceilings. So with the cooperation of friends who lived on the second floor, we moved in with them. But even there, it wasn't safe from the bombs. One night, a bomb fell into that apartment, exploded by the door, leaving the only way out was through the window, and that was the second floor. My father, who was a very tall man, knocked out the window and jumped, and he said, we have to quickly follow him before the whole place gets engulfed in flames. When my turn came, I stood on the windowsill and looked down. It seemed so far down. I was so scared of frozen place. I couldn't move. My mother pushed me out the window. Somehow my father did not catch me, and I fell on a pile of glass, cutting my arms and legs. When the family was down, my mother picked me up, carried me to a bomb shelter, and there she was pulling out shards of glass out of my limbs. These running to bomb shelters occurred over and over, particularly at night. At some point, we lost the water. A bomb severed the water pipes, and the only way we could get at least drinking water is running down the streets where there was still a functioning faucet. I remember where I was when Nazis attacked or entered Warsaw. I was in our own apartment. I don't remember it was the second or fifth or whatever floor, but I was too high up to see the faces of the Nazi soldiers. They were filling the width of the streets, 10, 15 abreast, whatever. But strangely, I could see a reflection of shining boots pounding and pounding the pavement. You know how many years have passed since then? Yet there's still some sounds, some smells, some aromas to which I still react emotionally. One such sound are low flying planes. Another one is a rhythmic pounding on a hard surface. I hear it and I tighten up. My parents felt that being Jewish and they were politically liberal. My father was the leader in the labor union in the Jewish division. They felt that as such, they would be among the first ones to be persecuted by the Nazis. So sometimes during the winter of 39 and 40, they sold the lease to our apartment, hired a Polish guide to smuggle us across the border into the Soviet Union. On one side, Poland borders with the Soviet Union. Why to go there? Because at that time, the Nazis were not there. And why to smuggle us? Because the borders were closed and the Soviets would not allow anyone to enter. I remember the last leg of that journey trying to cross the border. It was in the middle of the night, extremely cold. We were wearing layers and layers of clothing to keep warm and also to minimize under luggage. We were sitting inside a wagon of hay, the hay over our faces, over our heads, and over all that, an old blanket. So should a Nazi soldier come across that wagon at night, he would not be able to see that there are people in it. At some point, this man stopped, let us off in an area that was surrounded by tall trees. You couldn't see what's beyond that. And he said that we crossed the border and pointed where in the morning we were to take the train towards the city my parents were headed, called Bialystok. We huddled up for the remainder of the night. And when we woke up in the morning and left that secluded area, we saw a field of thousands of people laying on the snow, leaning against their bags, suitcases. This man did not take us across the border. He left us on the no man's land. My parents did not want to go back to Poland from where they were trying to escape. My mother pulled out a blanket, spread it over the snow among people. People were sitting very close one next to the other. She also pulled out a down comforter commonly used in Europe in winter. And this place in an open field in winter became my home for about 6 weeks. My mother would repeat to me over and over, move, move. If you move, you are not going to be that cold. I moved as much as I could, and when I couldn't anymore, I would crawl under the covers. At some point, my feet got frostbitten. I had open wounds, was unable to wear my shoes, so my mother tore a garment of hers and wrapped my feet in rags, and I shuffled around as well as I could. The only food we were able to buy was that which the present peasant women from nearby villages would come after sundown, bring bread, boiled potatoes in their skin, sometimes farmer cheese, and charge exorbitant prices. The only fluid we had for drinking was melting snow. I remember many scenes starting with the no man's land, but two images from that period are still vivid in my mind. I woke up one night and there was a strange man next to me under the covers. I tried to push him out, but apparently I fell asleep. And when I woke up in the morning, the man next to me was dead. People were dying from disease, from exposure, from starvation. And now the peasant women, in addition to bringing bread, were also bringing shovels for sale. And the young men buried the dead in shallow graves. The other scene, I was standing with my mother by a fire trying to warm myself, and a young woman approached holding a baby in her arms wrapped in blankets, and people assumed that she wanted to warm herself or her child. So they parted, letting her come close to the fire. But as she did so, a man looked into her arms and said, "Lady, your baby doesn't need warming anymore." The baby was dead. The man took the dead baby out of the mother's arms and proceeded where the Soviet soldiers were protecting the borders, and the crowd followed him. He laid the baby in front of one of the guards, and the crowd started shouting and crying, "Let us in, let us in. See, we are dying one by one." And that guard didn't say a thing, just kicked the baby back into the crowd. And I'm sure, like all others, it was buried. My parents apparently concluded that they have to take some drastic steps or we are not going to survive seeing people dying daily. One night, my father smuggled himself across the border into the Soviet Union. There, he bribed an official to give him a letter permitting the family to cross the border. But when he returned with that letter apparently said he may take his children and said nothing about my mother, and the guards would not let my mom go. Our parents decided that my father should take my sister and myself to safety and see thereafter what he can do to bring over mom. We walked a whole night in the forest. And for me, the pain was so extreme. My wounded feet with open wounds were wrapped with soft rags, and the earth was frozen and hard. But eventually we made it to Białystok. Around that city were clusters of Jews from Poland. We ended up in one such cluster, a wooded area with a lot of scattered little cabinets. This must have been cabins, sorry, not cabinets. This must have been at one time the property of a wealthy landlord, and those cabins were for his workers. No furniture of any kind, a few families on the floor in a small cabin. But being for 6 weeks outdoors in the winter, laying on a wooden floor with a roof over my head, I probably felt like a queen in a palace. My father had no more money left, and also travel in the Soviet Union then was forbidden. Only those who were big dignitaries or had a lot of money to bribe an official would be able to get a permission to travel. So my dad tried to reach the no man's land on rooftops of trains. He was caught by the police, put in jail for a few days, let out, and then kept on trying it over and over. During all that time, when our father was trying to reach the no man's land to save Mom. My sister and I were left alone. Here and there, some caring person offered us a meal, but I don't remember what and how we were able to eat beside that. Eventually, our father made it to the no man's land, but by the time he got there, no one was there anymore. The Nazis came, took all the people, including my mother, put them on trains and towards directions to Poland and Germany. For a little girl to think that she might never see her mama was very difficult to understand and more difficult even to accept. Our father found some work in the city, was commuting daily by train. My sister and I were left alone. She became my little mama, and we managed as well as we could. Days went by, weeks went by, nothing unusual happened. Then one day, we were standing over a basin propped up on a low stool so I could reach it as well, trying to do the family laundry. What did I know, a 5-year-old kid, how you do laundry? I spilled it on myself, on the floors. My knuckles got bloody. My sister was angry. I was upset. In midst of all the tension, the door to our cabin opened and our mother walked in. You can imagine my enormous joy and excitement, but also confusion. It seemed to me that it was so long since I saw her. I didn't know whether she was alive, and suddenly she showed up. It took me a very, very long time to trust that my mother will not vanish. I thought maybe just like she showed up, she would disappear. And I would wake up many times at night just to touch, is Mama here? Well, we were happy now. We were together. And that is the main thing that mattered. And we were no longer hungry as we were in the no man's land. Whatever our father was earning was enough to feed us. But that joy did not last for very long. We started hearing that Soviet soldiers were coming in the middle of the night and taking away all the young men, and no one knew what happened to these men. And my father then was a young man. One day, there was a rumor that our cluster was scheduled for such a raid. So my mother took the train to the city where my dad worked to warn him not to come back until he hears from her. But she missed the last train coming back to us that day. And that night, when my sister and I were alone, Soviet soldiers kicked in the door of the cabin. They said, "Get your stuff," and they marched us to a train station where there was a long line of cattle cars, and they would shove in as many people as they could in each of those box cars. My sister and I cried and cried that we are not going to go without our parents, and those soldiers kept on telling us lies and lies. When the platform was almost empty of people, we saw from a distance a small truck and our parents on it. Was I happy to see them? Was I relieved? I never asked how they heard about the raid, how they found transportation. All it mattered to me, they were there. And as soon as they arrived, they shoved that into one of those box cars. So many people in each of them that there was no room for anyone to stretch themselves on the floor. People were leaning against bags, suitcases, against wall, against one another, whatever they could. There were two sliding doors that would pull together to close the boxcar, and on the outside, across them, a heavy metal bar to hold the doors. When the doors were pulled and we inside, we were unable to open them. We had to wait until the soldiers decided to do so, and you never knew when they would. And also, when the doors were pulled, it was so dark you could hardly see. There were no windows. This was made for transportation of cows and horses and so on. The only light we had was that which was coming between the cracks of the boards. Once a day, soldiers walked around with buckets of soup, and everyone was given a cup of soup. On the days when we were lucky, we would get a little piece of bread, but those lucky days were very far apart. Most of the time, a cup of soup was the only food for the day. Once a day, sometimes twice, they would let everyone out under the train to relieve themselves. And you know, it doesn't take very long to forget about that notion of privacy. You just do the best you could. People were extremely hungry, tired, trying to sleep in a sitting position. Many were getting sick. Everyone anxious, scared, not understanding why the soldiers picked us up, where they would take us, and what they would do with us. We were on the train somewhere between 6 and 8 weeks, and through additional means of transportation, delivered to a labor camp in the Siberian taiga. Taiga is a very dense forest covering the northern part of Russia. Our little houses were placed right against the forest. Bears would come to the door front. At night, we heard Siberian wolves howling and we were scared. We heard stories about wolves attacking people at night, that is in the dark. And in Siberia in winter time, it's only about 3 hours daylight and the rest is dark at night. Temperature, they would drop sometimes up to 60 below. If you were outside for a minute or more than that, you would get frostbitten, your face turning completely white. We did not have clothing for that kind of a climate. And for me, a little kid, the snows were higher than I was, so I would rarely go outside. Everyone had to work, including my older sister who was probably 10, turning 11. The main work was a cement factory, and some younger men were sent to further clear the forest. I did not talk to my children about my Holocaust experiences. I didn't talk to anyone about it. There were people who worked with me for many years, and all they knew is that I was born in Europe. But my youngest child, Naomi, kept on asking me, and apparently I related some bits and pieces because I found in her high school writing a reference to two situations in Siberia. There was one store, the governmental store, and rarely would you go there and find something you needed for your daily life. But people would frequent it daily anyway to see what do they have there today in the store. But no matter what they had, everything was rationed, including bread. My mother sent me once to, to the store to get the family's rations of bread. And bread came in big, round, lumpy loaves, exposed sitting on the counter, black like mud and heavy like clay. And the clerk in the store would weigh, in our case, what was the portion for 4 people. So I told Naomi that I was giving a large piece, and with that tiny, tiny little piece. And it took so much willpower for me to resist my desire of eating the little piece because I was very hungry. So Naomi said, if you were very hungry, how come you didn't eat it? I told her that this was the bread for the whole family, and we had to wait until mother divided it and let us have it. But no sooner did I hand over bread to Mama, she took the little piece and put it in my mouth. At some other time, when it was my birthday, my mother said, let's pretend that there is no war. What kind of a present would you like for your birthday? I told her a big loaf of bread and that I could eat as much of it as I want to. And I saw tears flowing down her face, and I had no idea what did I do wrong to make my mama cry. We were extremely hungry and cold and scared. We were in Siberia somewhere between 2 and 2.5 years. And there is one day during that time that I remember not being hungry. Oh, I remember that day very well. We were given a tiny little piece of land to plant potatoes. And my mother said that on the day we harvest the potatoes, we will have a meal that I can eat as many potatoes as I want to. The day we brought the potatoes from the field, the store had fresh herring. My mother got a herring, cut it into little pieces. We baked the potatoes outdoors and ate them with herring. Oh, was that good? I don't remember how many potatoes I ate, but I remember a thought that stayed with me thereafter for a very, very long time. I thought, maybe when I grow up, I'll be so lucky that I'll become rich. Not a little rich, but very rich. Then I'll be able to eat potatoes every day. I thought that to eat potatoes every day, you had to be either royalty or very rich. Well, I'm neither one or the other, but I do eat potatoes. Now I have to be careful not to eat too many, but I still like potatoes. But no potato will ever taste as good as the one in Siberia when I was so hungry. From Siberia, they sent us to Uzbekistan. Uzbekistan then was a southern republic of the Soviet Union. Now it's an independent country. I am sure that my parents felt that going south to a warm climate, life will be easier, food will be more available. But while we were extremely hungry in Siberia, we were starving in Uzbekistan. They placed us in a very poor farming village. My parents were not given any land to cultivate, and there was no way of finding work. My father walked from farmer to farmer, willing to do any kind of work in exchange for food. Once in a while, he would get a day's work, but most of the time not. There were stretches of time that we lived on boiled grass and leaves. My mother would go into the field, pick up grass, leaf, and anything else that was grown wild, boil it, drink it first herself to see how she reacted to it. When she was okay with it, she would give it to us as well. There was one period of time we lived on broiled onions. Some farmer must have had a good crop of onion, and in exchange for some of my mother's garment, she got a bag of onions. We all came down with malaria. Malaria is such a difficult, literally violent disease. You could see a person one day, he seems okay, a week later, he is gone. I say violent, I had malaria. And probably most of the time was with the high fever. With the high fever was, I'm sorry guys. Call from Lisa Kern. Bear with me a moment. Most of the time with the high fever, I was probably unable to speak. But I remember when I was that I was crying and crying, my bones were breaking. No matter how many blankets you have, or I already had, I had such a violent shaking, a cold of my body. And when I recovered from malaria, I was so weak that I had difficulty walking. There were some Jews from Poland in Uzbekistan. I don't know who they were and how they were able to do it, but they established orphanages for Jewish children from Poland. and would recruit not just orphans, but any Jewish child from Poland. And this was simply an attempt of saving the children from dying of starvation. One day, a man showed up in our village, talked to our parents. Next day, he came with a horse and buggy. Our mother told us we'll go to a place that there will be other children, food will be more available, and our parents will visit when possible. I think it took us a few days on the buggy until we came to the village where the orphanage was housed. The orphanage was basically in one room, a large room, from one end of the wall to the other. Boards had been ripped off the floor, propped up on a stack of bricks, and girls were laying on those boards, one next to the other tightly, covered with old blankets, and their heads completely shaved. Remember the first picture you saw of me, I had long braids. They shaved my head completely. Across the room, the same arrangement for boys, their heads shaved as well. The caregivers shaved the children's heads because the sanitary conditions were horrible. I don't remember when and where I was able to take a bath or a shower. And they feared that under those conditions, the kids will come down with lice that spread diseases. And apparently lice nestle in hair. Well, we found out very quickly that lice nestle in all kinds of other places because we were about 100 bald-headed kids covered with those crawling things. Those lice make your skin burn and itch so badly that you are ready to rip it off. I remember bleeding all over from that intense scratching. And strangely, again, you know how many years ago that happened. When I just think about it, my head starts itching so badly that I want to take my 10 fingers and scratch it. It lasts for a few minutes and then it goes away. A few months after entering the orphanage, my father died. There was an epidemic of dysentery in the village my parents lived. No physician, no pharmacy. My mother walked the whole night to another community in search of penicillin. I don't know whether she obtained it or not, but when she returned, my father was dead, buried in a communal grave. My mother didn't even know in which one. The war ended in 1945, but I stayed in the orphanage in Uzbekistan till 46. I don't know what was the reason we were unable to return sooner, but I had no other choice but to wait. During all the years of the Holocaust, extreme hunger, at times to the point of starvation, was a daily part of my life. There were many years of loneliness when I was in the orphanages. There was a lot of anxiety, not knowing what was going on and not understanding. The adults, probably with good intention, didn't share with us what they knew. At that time, maybe think it's better for the kids not to know what's going on. But the less I knew, the more anxious I would become over it. But I tried as much as possible to keep myself constructively involved. I learned to read myself when I was quite young, Polish, because Polish was my childhood language. While in the Soviet Union, I learned to read Russian and also to speak. And I would read anything I could put my hands on in one language or the other. When possible, I attended a kind of a semi-school, but my educational opportunities were extremely limited. The only place where I was expressing what I felt and what I thought was in writing poetry. I was writing poetry since I was a young girl. My home here in Michigan was hit by a tornado many years ago in 75. Half of the house ripped off and blown away, with it most of my belongings. A few years ago, I was looking for a book which I thought survived the tornado. And to my great surprise, not only did I find the book, but in that book, I found one notebook of my poems from the orphanage in Uzbekistan. This must have been written between 44 and 46. You can imagine how yellow the paper is with age. I was afraid to pick it up that it would crumble in my hand, but it didn't. And reading some of those poems as an adult now surprises me that nothing there indicates this had been written by a child. Nothing cute, nothing funny, just expressing longing for normalcy. How wonderful it will be to live in a small place just with my family, not 100 kids in one room. How great it must be not to be hungry. I'm sure I didn't remember what it felt, just imagine. And thinking of my aunts, uncles, and cousins, and how wonderful it would be to attend a normal school. And poetically describing Poland. Poland to me was paradise on earth. But of course, I left Poland, I was either 5 or 6 years old. But when I returned to Poland, nothing of what I envisioned or hoped for became reality. First of all, I spent another 4 or 5 years in orphanages after the war. Anti-Semitism was still raging. There were quite a number of Jews who were killed by Polish people after the war, particularly in small towns. The tiny, tiny Jewish community that was left alive, and my orphanage was in Krakow, tried to do everything possible for us, the kids, to survive, to protect us from any harm, and to provide as good conditions as they were able to manage. The orphanage, and so was the school just for Jewish children, so were the caregivers. The school was held in one room. There were a handful of us kids left of various ages in one room. That school took us once to what used to be a concentration camp in Poland. In the display room was a pile of shoes, men's shoes, women's shoes, little kid shoes, shoes of those who were sent to the gas chamber to die. There was a pile of hair, women who had long hair. They cut their hair before sending them to death, and they used the hair for various purposes. There were lamps with shades made of human skin, soap made of human flesh. It took me an enormous length of time before I could take a bar of soap in my hand and not think of my aunts, uncles, and cousins. I told you that my extended family in Poland numbered close to 100 members. Not a single one of them was left alive. They were all killed. I am sure many of them during the Warsaw Uprising, all the young ones. For my mother to continue living in Poland, she felt like living on the graveyard of her brothers and sisters. She and my older sister, who was by then married, she married a boy from the orphanage, they decided that they must leave Poland. The only place they were able to go was to Israel because the Israeli government was helping Holocaust survivors who wanted to immigrate. I did not know anything about Israel. I was so eager to catch up educationally uh, for all those lost years. But the ruling in the orphanage was that once I reached the age of 17, I will have to leave the orphanage and take care of myself. I did not know a single person in Poland outside of the orphanage. That was my world of peace. Though I did not live with my mother and my sister, they were within a distance that I could periodically take public transportation and visit with them. And apparently, they provided some emotional support which I needed because I did not have the courage to be left alone in Poland after they leave. So in 1950, I joined my mother to immigrate to Israel. Israel was a different chapter of my life with different challenges. I did not know anyone in Israel. I knew I would have to support myself, and I thought that I'll probably have to support my mother as well because she was a sick woman. And I did not know the language spoken there. But as you can see, I survived. I don't want to leave you with the thought and the feeling, here is the poor woman who had such a tough life, because I absolutely don't think of myself that way. Not only that I survived, that's okay, but that I survived and I was able to create a meaningful life and significantly contribute to my community. Please show the next photo. I want to show you what I looked like when, oh no, when I came to the United States. Bear with it, it will take a second. Yes, this is what I looked like when I came to the United States. This is my passport photo. I was about 21, 22 years old. I was married, had a little baby, and did not know a word of English. That was the third country I was coming without knowing the spoken language. Soviet Union without Russian, Israel without Hebrew, United States without English. But fortunately, when I was young, I was picking up languages miraculously fast. It didn't take me too long. I entered the University of Cincinnati. I lived in Cincinnati for about 16, 17 years. I earned an undergraduate degree in psychology, then a master's in social psychology, and a few years later, I entered Xavier University, also in Cincinnati, and earned a second master's, an MBA, with a major in hospital management. I had very rewarding work as a healthcare executive, including for a year, I served on an advisory committee in Washington, D.C., a committee that dealt with women, children, and drug addiction that would fly me in once a month. I am retired now, which means I work and I don't get paid. But I do things that are extremely important to me. My whole adult life, I tried to live by the Jewish ethical principle called tikkun olam. Please remove the picture. Uh, how I do it, first of all, how I relate to people in my personal, professional, and volunteer life. I respect fully and equally every human being, every good human being. Doesn't matter what's the color of their skin. Doesn't matter what's their religion, where they came from, poor or rich. They are good human beings. They have my full respect. I try to use my time and my skills to enrich the life of my community. If you were here local, Michigander, I might find you once in our magnificent art museum, Detroit Institute of Art. And if I were to find you there, I would talk about art and not about the Holocaust. I teach art and I give tours. I'm a mediator in courts, which means I help people resolve their conflict without appearing before a judge. I am on the board of directors of the oldest civil rights organization in the US called American Jewish Committee. I do all those things as a volunteer. Of course, I studied those areas to know what I am volunteering about. But the most important thing, my mission in life now, is to use my Holocaust experiences to promote tolerance and acceptance of diversity. Needed now probably more than ever. Since the University of Michigan published my book, you can have, show us the next photos, please, and I will tell you which. Keep on going about the book.
1 second.
Okay. We have the book cover, then is my website with the book. You can go to the gathering of, oh, excuse me. Next one. And out here, it said, since the university published my book, and now when we come back towards the end, I'll give you the name of the book and my website again. I have been speaking all over the country. The largest gathering was here in an Indiana school, where I spoke to 1,800 students and teachers. Next. Here I was in Traverse City, and when I travel distances, I have a few speaking engagement in the whole area. Next. I speak to middle schools and high schools, but when I was in Boyne City for other engagement, a teacher asked me, would I please speak to the fourth graders because they studied immigration. Look at all those little hands up. They had wonderful questions, but they were prepared. Next, please. I have been in many, many churches. By now, looking at them, I don't even remember which is which. Next. Next. This was in Traverse City. It was a community-wide event, but it was held in a church. Next. And this is in the Upper Michigan, Hancock. Interesting. The church the temple right now has about 6 or 8 members. It used to be a very large Jewish community when there was mining in the areas. But the invitation was made to the whole community, and I spoke there twice, and all seats were taken up. Next, please. And I was a keynote speaker for a few years in courthouses on Constitution Days when schools were invited. Next. Next. And here is Department of Health and Human Services in the Traverse City and area. Next. And this was a banquet of the Knights of Columbus. Next, and you see their get-ups of the Knights of Columbus. Next. Here was one of, they are all very interesting, but here was one of the very powerful programs we had. Stennis Space Center is a NASA facility in Mississippi where they test all the rockets. And this was Admiral Okun who welcomed me. Next. Next, please. And handed me a very nice plaque and a book. And just as a sideline, it became almost emotional and embarrassing experience. What allows me to speak, and I'm moving away for a second, I'll be right back. What allows me to travel all those distances is my significant other, Bob, who, who drives no matter how many distance that is, and he carries the books and all does all kinds of helpful events. And I refer to him as my director of transportation in logistics. Is there a way I could show you Bob's picture if I hold it like that?
Hold it up. Hold up.
Pardon?
Hold the
Oh,
up.
yes.
Okay.
This is Bob and I.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And Bob will sometimes offer to say that I practice what I preach, referring to diversity. As you can see, I am a deeply rooted Jew, not a religious, but a deeply rooted Jew. And Bob is a deeply rooted religious Catholic. And I refer to him as my good Catholic boy. I will welcome all your questions. I hope that one day, when life returns to normal, you will invite me to your communities where a larger group of people can hear my story and my message. When I come, I always bring lots of books with me because people like to buy the books. The book right now is only available on my website. And my website is millerirenespeaker.com, and we can flash it to write with one of my books. And it is on Kindle, available on Amazon, but only on Kindle. So the book you can still get on my website, not in Israel, because it will be extremely expensive, the postage, yes. But I send them out here domestically. I am right now waiting and eager to hear your questions. And as I pointed out, I will stay with you for as long as you have questions and your leaders feel it's appropriate.
If you have a question, just send me a message. My name is Trudy, about your question, and then I will take you off of mute and you will be able to ask her your question.
Hello?
Hello, ladies. I see two of you here.
Oh, that's
Hi.
Oh, hi. So, yeah, I just asked, well, I typed it to Trudy. I said, does your experience during the Holocaust guide your everyday decision making or not? And do you think about it more during this pandemic right now? Because there are some similarities.
Does it guide me? I am not aware that this vision for my thinking is guided by it. But everything that we experience in life becomes a part of us. And it is very difficult for me to judge which part of my background drives my decision. During this time of enormous stress, and more so during this time of the political stress, before the coronavirus,
Mm-hmm.
I have many flashbacks of my Holocaust experiences.
Sorry about that. I can imagine that you do have.
It's something, you have a telephone ring, I don't know what it is.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
Okay.
We many times thought about people having flashbacks during this before the pandemic happened because
The situation is very difficult for me.
But then I think also we're kind of felt bad about equating them when, we had it so good still now.
I'm sorry, I didn't fully understand your
Well, you know, to equate now with the political situation now with World War II, I think is hard because we still have it so good now.
Well, you know, I am not saying parallels. Let's say there is a lot of deja vu.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, thank you. On the next question is from Gail. So hold on, let me find Gail. Unmute Gail.
Hi there.
Hi, Gail.
Hello, Irene. Thanks for doing this today.
Thank you. Gail, where are you at?
I'm in Chicago,
In
Illinois.
Chicago.
So my question was, sorry, I just got emotional all of a sudden. My 15-year-old daughters were supposed to go to Poland for spring break to visit some of the camps, and their trip was canceled. So I'm just wondering, you know, they're missing out on a great opportunity to see it in person. And what's the one thing you want them to know about your experience that might help fill in some of the gaps in their education about the Holocaust?
First of all, about your daughter not being able. She's a young girl. She will still have many, many opportunities to go. And this pandemic and all that will not last forever. What I would want the young people to know or to leave a message: don't be a bystander when you see injustice happens. If we would have all the good people in Europe not be bystanders, we wouldn't have 6 million of innocent, among them 1.5 million children killed. We need not just remember what happened, but we need to take an active role to do everything possible to prevent such things from happening again.
And, you know, I think there are a generation that are learning, if they see bullying going on, that, you know, to intervene or to tell someone. So I think they're being raised in general to call out.
And when I speak to schools, and I have spoken to thousands or maybe hundreds of thousands of schools, I stress the importance of not being a bystander when injustice happens, that it is everyone's responsibility to react to injustices.
That is great advice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gail. Thank you, Gail. Gail, I see you have your camera. In reality, I look a little better than I come to guys.
Don't we all? Right? I just wanted to film it so we can look at it again later and remind ourselves what you said.
Thank you.
Don't worry, I won't. I'll put a nice filter on it for you.
Okay, but you know, the operas know how to kind of pull out some wrinkles.
Yes, no problem. I'll do that for you.
But I'm in good physical shape. Yesterday I walked 7 miles.
Wow, just for fun.
And now just to escape the confinement of the 4 walls, what I called my gilded cage.
How many people did you see when you were out?
I live in a condo community and there aren't too many, and we kind of see each other across the street. If I see someone on one side, I walk the road. Yes, not too many. And people are indoors.
Were people walking dogs? I saw that a lot this weekend.
My son, who lives about 40 miles from me in Ann Arbor, came with his wife and the dog, but we talked across the street. We walked.
Great. Well, good work. Good job.
I wasn't allowed to neither touch him nor the dog.
Can dogs touch other dogs though? That's what I wonder.
I don't think we know about enough what the dogs can convey. But I saw my son and he brought a corned beef sandwich.
Can't say no to that.
Good seeing you.
All right. Our next question is, hold on, give me 1 second. From Johnny Schwartz. Let me get him unmuted. All right, Johnny.
Hello, Johnny.
Hi, Irene. Well, first, thank you. Thanks a lot for speaking today. I know it's not easy to do it over Zoom, but
Excuse me, Johnny, where are you? I want to know where I connect.
yeah, I'm in New York.
New York. Okay.
Manchester. So, dealing with things here, but it's actually going quite well, and we were able to still walk around and everything as long as we keep distance. So it's been good. But thanks again for your time, and I think even though we're on Zoom, I was really able to feel everything you said. I think I had, a question for you, sort of two-part. One, when you were speaking about your mother and her eventual, you said she joined you guys back when she was able to cross no man's land. If you could, share, if you ever found out how she made it.
I have a whole chapter in my book about it.
Okay, so then I don't need to ask you now. And I think, on a personal note, my grandfather just passed away before this pandemic, my mother's father, and he lives in Israel. And my mom, had a complicated relationship with her father. And I think a lot of the things from the war carried on in him, and he never was able to uncover that through his life. And my mom was never able to see that. So, without stepping boundaries.
You want to know my relationship with my kids?
Well, no, with your mother. And
with my mother, my relationship with my mother was, most of my life I didn't live with her. Until the war, as a young child, I was with my mother, with the family. During the war, I was in the orphanage a few years. After the war, I was in an orphanage too. And from the orphanage, I went to Israel. We didn't live together. She was in a tent camp and I was in a YMCA. And then I left for Israel. So my relationship with my mother was remote, very remote. But I asked my son once, me being a Holocaust survivor, how did it affect me bringing up my children? And my son happens to be a psychologist. He says, I never had another mother to compare. But then a bit later, he said, it was very important to you that we learn how to stand on our 2 feet. I realized, yes, I would not step in to help them until they tried to do everything they can themselves. When they couldn't, even as young children, homework or whatever, when they exhausted their own abilities, this is when I would step in. I lost your sound. I can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, I can hear you now.
I muted myself when you were speaking, but I did, yeah. It's in her book. Well, thank you very much. No, I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Glad you've done too. That's nice to hear.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, the next question is from Stuart. Let me find Stuart.
Hi.
I hear a hi, but I can't see Stuart.
Can you see Stuart now?
I can see Stuart now, and I will ask everyone, where are you from? Where are you at right now, Stuart?
I'm in Haines, Alaska.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks again for doing this for everybody. My question is a little bit more on the before everything started to go south in the Holocaust. Was what were the attitudes of the non-Jewish Poles towards the Jews, and how did that affect the Jewish community and how everybody came together?
Okay. I can tell you more, not firsthand, because I left Poland when I was a young child. anti-Semitism was very intense in Poland. I know that my father, who finished accounting, whatever, was unable to get a job as and ended up being furniture makers. And the Jewish community kind of left in separate quarters. So I don't know. But on the other hand, my parents were politically active liberal. They had some friends who were non-Jewish. And I remember before I knew how to read anything, I was able to recognize the Jewish alphabet as opposed to the Polish. And I remember seeing my mother reading from the Jewish newspaper in Polish to some friends. And when I asked her, she says it was something very important. I wanted to read it to my non-Jewish friends. So apparently they were individual. But I know that coming to Poland after the war, how anti-Semitism still existed. And I make some comments to it and some describe in my book when I returned to Poland. But Poland was one of the most intense anti-Semitic countries. And it started off with Polish church. And the reason Germans were established most of the death camps in Poland because they knew they would have support from the Polish people, and they did.
Thank you.
Anti-Semitism exists still in Poland now.
Hmm.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to call on Eitan Raz.
And I always want to know where they are at.
What?
No, it's okay. I estimate where they are at.
Hello. Hello, Irene.
Oh, shalom. אתה בארץ? Are you in Israel?
Yeah, I'm in Israel.
In what city?
גלי תקווה.
גלי תקווה.
And I wanted to ask you about your time in Israel. After you came to Israel and before you left to the state, what did you do? What happened? And if you can also...
It's again a whole story, a whole chapter of it is in my book. I was a young teenager. I was a teenager and had a very, very tough time. Very tough time. Trying to support myself, and my mother lived in a tent camp, and 6, 7 girls in one room in a kind of a YMCA, and from day to day question how am I to feed myself. But speaking about picking up languages quickly, I came to Israel without knowing a word of English. I ended up 2 years ago a public school teacher. For 2 years, I was a public school teacher in Israel.
Wow.
They had what they call seminar limorim. For less than a year, they put you through the seminar limorim, and they put me in a 49 kids in first grade and second grade. That was the time of influx of immigrants, and they needed teachers. So, and during 9 or 10 months, they made a teacher of me. Yeah. But that was a long time ago. I was a teenager. I still speak Hebrew, but my vocabulary is limited.
That's okay.
אני מבינה הכל, אבל מדברת רק.
זה בסדר גמור.
I understand all, not all, but I speak less. But my sister lived in Israel. She died last year. And as soon as I was able to afford, take me a long time, I would visit her once a year, and we would speak Polish. With her, I would speak Polish. With her neighbor, I spoke Russian. With her kids, I spoke Hebrew, and with the grandkids, English.
Wow.
Thank you.
Nice to hear. Thank you very much.
And thank you for listening. Now you need to tell them that they have to move on, whatever.
Okay.
I look at the paintings. Now, all who are tied in can hear my responses, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, I'm gonna ask this one last question.
And then what I would appreciate is that you put my website on the screen.
Okay.
You know, you have, and with my book, you have somewhere Irene Miller.
Yeah, we'll send out an email to everyone also that'll include a link to your website with the book.
Okay.
So somebody wanted to ask, but they did not want to ask publicly. If you have any experience with
They can ask any questions they want public.
what? If you have any experience with anti-Semitic events after you moved to the United States?
No, I did not. And I just want to comment one thing. I wasn't asked a question, but I want to say. In all my talks, and my book was published in 2012. And graduate, when you go on my website under events every year, you see all the places I have spoken. And most of those, I don't speak to Jewish people. They probably think they know it all. The reaction is overwhelmingly positive. I have stacks and stacks for principals, from teachers, for pastors, how important that message is. When I speak in churches or wherever there are people of religion, they tell me, you were chosen to do it. You have to keep on telling the story. So the reaction is overwhelmingly positive.
All right, so then with that, we will end here. So thank you to everyone for coming. We really appreciate it and hope everyone has a great rest of their day.
Yes, and stay indoors and take care of yourselves.
Okay, and then I will.
And I'll stay in contact with you after you.
Yeah, and we'll be sending out an email to everyone because we have everyone's information because they had to sign up.
But could you all together put on Miller Irene Speaker?
Yes.
MillerIreneSpeaker.com, and my email is there too. MillerIreneSpeaker.com is, when you have it, you know, when you put on one of those books right there, it says Miller Irene Speaker.